Do you know your current body fat percentage? Most guys, including myself when I started, have no idea where they stand, or they use inaccurate methods to estimate it. And if you don't know where you're starting from, it becomes very difficult to set a realistic goal and to know how long it's going to take you to get there. And the other issue is how a body fat percentage looks depends a lot on how much muscle you have. So other people's numbers may not apply to you. So in this video, I'm gonna show you something different. I'm gonna go through real examples of different body fat percentages and how they look based on how much muscle the person has. We'll go from competition level shredded at 5% body fat all the way up to 30% body fat and above. And at the end of the video, I'm gonna go over what I recommend to estimate your body fat and how you can track your progress over time. So let's dive into it, starting with 5% body fat. This is what I would call the extreme zone, and it's a level that nobody maintains all year round. And 5% body fat also looks very different depending on the amount of muscle mass. Take Christian Bale in The Machinist. He was very underweight and he looked sick. I believe he was around 120 pounds at 5'11". There's no muscle fullness, he looks very depleted and starved, and honestly, this is dangerously underweight. It's not something anyone should strive for. Now contrast that with Alberto Nunez, a well-known natural bodybuilder. He's completely shredded at 160 pounds at 5'10". He looks very different because he's carrying a significant amount of muscle mass, so even at 5-6% body fat, he still has decent size and muscle definition, and it's not just skin and bones. And at the extreme end, take someone like Chris Bumstead, one of the best physiques of all time, who competes at 240 pounds at 6'1". That is an 80-pound difference compared to Alberto. And in photos, it's often hard to judge just how big some of these bodybuilders actually are. And the reason I wanted to include some of these enhanced athletes is to help you set realistic expectations for yourself. And the bottom line is, 5% body fat is not sustainable for anybody. Going there only makes sense if you're doing it for a short-term acting role or if you're planning to compete in bodybuilding. Now going a bit higher, this brings us to the most commonly mentioned 10% body fat. This is the so-called Hollywood superhero look. At 10% body fat, we're kind of getting to a physique that is achievable for a lot of people if they're willing to invest a ton of hard work and time. But not all 10% body fat physiques look the same. Look at Will Poulter before he bulked up for the Guardians of the Galaxy. I read that he was around 170 pounds at 6'2" in this photo. And although he is very lean, he doesn't have that fitness model aesthetic because he lacks the muscular development. Now here's what 10% body fat looks like as a natural lifter after many years of training. This is me at 174 pounds at 5'10". Fully visible abs, decent muscle separation, and overall this is the leanest I'd personally go because there are major downsides. Staying at 10% body fat also requires a lot more tracking, managing the diet, and not really making that much progress in the gym. So even though it looks great in photos, this isn't a body fat percentage I aspire to maintain all year round. Now if you look at someone like Sam Sulek, his 10% at 240 pounds looks very different. Even though we're similar heights, his physique is a lot more developed with so much more muscle mass that he looks like he could be a lot lower than 10%. As a general rule, the more muscle mass you have, the leaner you can look at any body fat percentage. And also this is another example of a difference between a natural and an enhanced physique. So what can you take away from this? Well, if you don't have much muscle mass, 10% body fat may not look as impressive as you think. You may want to focus on building more muscle first before you attempt to get this lean. Now one level above is my favorite body fat to maintain long term, which is 15%. For most natural lifters, I believe 12 to 15% is going to be the sweet spot. You look athletic, your strength levels are solid, recovery is great, and you don't have to obsess over every meal. And of course, how good your 15% looks depends on how much muscle you have. For example, Daniel Radcliffe was around 145 pounds at 5'5", around the time he starred in Victor Frankenstein. At 15%, his physique definitely looks solid. You can see some abdominal definition, but I do believe that he would look a lot better if he packed on a bit more muscle. Here's me at 15%, weighing around 190 pounds. I'm visibly bigger, I can fill out shirts, and this is where I personally feel like my strongest. Although my abs start to fade more into a 4-pack, I feel great, workouts keep progressing, and I don't really have to track my diet at this level, and hunger is not an issue. Now let's compare this to Alan Ritchson as Jack Reacher, one of my favorite shows. He looks massive at 235 pounds at 6'2". It is a very inspiring physique. At the same time, it's important to be realistic about what is possible naturally. And if you're now around 15% body fat and you don't have that much muscle and maybe long term you'd like to be leaner, I definitely recommend looking into doing a lean bulk and making sure you're hitting that subscribe button. Now, if we go one level higher, we're now at 20% body fat, and this is a comfortable place to be. Even with basic healthy eating, removing the processed junk food, limiting sodas and alcohol, getting your steps in and some occasional training, you're gonna be on cruise control. Maintaining 20% body fat is not that difficult. You're not lean, but you're also not overweight. Paul Rudd, before Ant-Man, was around 172 pounds at 5'10", and I would estimate him around 20% body fat. He looks healthy, but there are a lot of handles starting to show, and there isn't that much muscularity and overall definition in his physique. Compare that to how Jeffrey Verdi Schofield looks at 220 pounds at 6 foot. The reason why I wanted to show you Jeffrey is to highlight what is possible as a natural for those who are willing to put in the work and want to have this size. At 20% body fat, he looks great because of muscular development. He's been training for a long time and is determined to reach his full potential. And then we have someone like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, weighing around 260 pounds at 6'5". He doesn't have visible abs in this photo, but he's jacked and looks very impressive and still has a decent amount of vascularity for this body fat. And if you're now around 20% body fat, I'd consider that level to be about the top of a lean bulk and would recommend going down to 15% body fat, maybe even a little bit lower if you have the muscle mass so you can lean bulk again to build a little bit more, or you maintain that lean physique for a little bit longer. Now going higher, we're around at 25% body fat. And once you pass 25%, that excess fat becomes a lot more noticeable. Take Mr. Beast before his transformation. He was at 212 pounds at 6'5", and this is what 25% body fat looks like with low muscle mass. Now compare that to someone like Jeff Nippert at 187 pounds at 5'5", when he was at the peak of his bulk. Even though he has a good amount of body fat on him, you can definitely still see that he lifts. Even without posing, you can see his chest and arms are really solid and well developed. Now taking it one step further to the extremes, here's Hafthor Bronson at 450 pounds at 6'9". He has so much muscle mass you can almost see his abs even though he's at 25% body fat. Now chances are you're not trying to break the deadlift world record, so for most guys I think 25% body fat is a wake-up call moment to start a structured fat loss phase. And the good news is that getting from 25 down to 15% is generally doable within about 4 to 5 months depending on how consistent you are. The visual differences between 25 and 15% are huge. You're gonna feel a lot better and it's definitely worth it. Now if we keep going up, we arrive at 30% body fat or higher. Once you're at 30% or above, we're talking about serious excess weight, and it's really time to take action. At 5'10", this would put me over 250 pounds, even with the amount of muscle that I currently have after almost 15 years of lifting. And this is also where health starts to decline. We're talking high blood pressure, cholesterol, type 2 diabetes, increased risk of insulin resistance, all kinds of other problems, and often a lot of joint pain. An example of 30% with low muscle would be someone like Jack Black at 230 pounds at 5'6". Compare that to Dmitry Azovsky at 350 pounds, where he deliberately gained weight for a social experiment. I'd consider him much higher than 30% body fat, but the reason I included him here as an example is because he had a decent amount of muscle mass. And then at the extremes, we have Eddie Hall when he weighed 434 pounds at 6'2". He looked very overweight even with all the muscle mass that he's carrying. Eddie has mentioned multiple times how much his health was at risk being that heavy. And if you're above 30% body fat right now, I think your main priority should be to lose body fat to get healthier. Now the good news is you'll see progress relatively fast, and losing even just 20 pounds can make a huge difference. I have a few videos on what to do if you're at 30% body fat, which I'll leave in the description below. Now if you're looking to estimate your body fat percentage, here's the reality. I've tried all the methods: DEXA scans, calipers, scales, and all kinds of different devices you can use at home. For long-term trends, I would consider the DEXA scan the gold standard for estimating body fat. Plus, you get some valuable info on your bone density and visceral fat. I've done multiple scans over the years, and really the main downside is that it's not practical to do very often. So I'd consider DEXA more as a snapshot and as a way to track your year-to-year progress. Now, you also often hear about body fat calipers. Calipers can work if you know what you're doing. But if you're not skilled, I find the margin of error to be pretty high. Small differences in measurements have a big impact once you start adding them into formulas. So it's okay to rely on a caliper if you know someone who's really good at it, who can do the measurements for you, but it's really tricky to do accurately by yourself. Now, the third common method is using a smart scale or an in-body machine, and these rely on bioelectrical impedance. They're more practical, but the main problem is inaccuracy. I've used some pretty expensive scales where one day it'll say 10% body fat, the next day I'm 18% body fat, so even little things can throw it off. And often they underestimate your body fat. In-body had me at 9% body fat when I was clearly more like 14-15%. And for those reasons, I'm not a really big fan. Honestly, other than a DEXA, the easiest option is to have someone experienced who's seen a lot of physiques and DEXAs take a look at your physique photos, or just using a body fat percentage chart like the one I'm showing you here to get a basic idea. Now, for tracking your progress, which is really important, I recommend using a combination of 4 things. You have your average daily weight, weekly waist measurements, your training log, and your progress photos. If you see that your average weight is going down, your waist is going down, and your strength levels are going up, it's safe to assume that you're losing body fat. Because if your protein intake is good and you're progressing in the gym and you're lifting regularly, you won't be losing much muscle. And I also recommend taking progress photos with different angles so you can see where the fat is lost. Don't only look at the belly fat around your lower stomach, because that's the last place to get lean. Pay attention to your lower back, your legs, your shoulders, your arms to see all the progress you're making. I find that the side angle photo often reveals progress that's not visible from the front or the back. And seeing how your body actually changes over time is way more important than some random body fat number you get from a scale. Remember, your body fat percentage is just another tool to help you figure out whether you need to lose fat or build muscle or do both. At the end of the day, the most important thing is what you see in the mirror. If you're happy with what you see, it doesn't matter what the number is. By the way, if you're interested in coaching and working with me to help you get lean and gain more muscle, details for coaching are in the description below, so check those out. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'm gonna see you in my next video.